Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for our presentation, Using the Cloud for Speed of Thought Analytics on All Your Data. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Each attendee is in a listen-only mode for the duration of our presentation. We will be engaging with the audience through our question and answer session at the end of today's webinar. We encourage you all to submit any questions you might have at any time during today's presentation through the chat feature you see in the lower left corner of the screen. We'll be taking as many questions as possible, and if we don't address yours directly, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually. At the end of our presentation, each presenter's contact details will be available. Before we get started, we have a brief poll that we'd like you to take. We're curious to know those of you who are already using Tableau or Snowflake or Tableau and Snowflake together. As a reminder, to answer the polling question, select the answer that best describes you and select Submit directly on your screen. We'll wait just another moment while more questions are rolling in. Thank you for your answers. And those questions are still rolling in. Remember, click directly on your screen. Okay, just another moment. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for those answers, everyone. Today's presentation is being recorded. It will be available following the presentation. Snowflake will be sending you the recording by week's end. And now I'd like to welcome today's presenters. Sanjay Macheti, Client Services Lead, Ask.com. Ross Perez, Senior Product Marketing Manager with Tableau, and John Bach, VP Marketing and Products from Snowflake. Gentlemen, welcome, and let's get started. I'll pass the presentation over to John Bach from Snowflake. John, please take it away.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's joining us today. As mentioned before, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to enter those at any time during today's presentation. And definitely if you have any other technical issues, by all means also send a question through that chat window and we'll make sure to get it addressed. So what I wanted to do was first talk a little bit with Sanjay about some of the background about what they've been doing at Ascom. Sanjay, really appreciate your joining us today.
All right. Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yes. So maybe just to kick it off, tell us a little bit about Ascom and your parent company, IAC.
Sure. Ascom, which is actually now called IAC Publishing Labs, owns and operates a portfolio of websites such as Smarter, Consumer Search, Pronto, and Shop 411. So each of these sites are informational or reference sites designed to help consumers make smarter decisions. IAC, on the other hand, which is the parent company of Ascom, actually operates in many different verticals. Ascom is one of the leading websites in the search space. IAC has many other popular brands such as Dictionary.com, Match.com, Vimeo, and Tinder.
Okay, that's great. So tell me a little bit about your role and where you and your group fit into the company.
Sure. At Ascom, I'm in a client services role. So what I do is act as a liaison between our user community and our technical groups. So in our group specifically is into big data and business intelligence. So what we do for the company is that we house all the information, streams of information that comes from various sources and structure them and make it available as a reporting entity. So that's where our group would fit into the overall organization.
Okay. Yeah, and so kind of interesting to hear what's kind of like a week in the life or a day in the life in a typical week or a day in your organization for you and for your team.
Sure. So probably I'll explain the kind of data sources that we have and the data that comes through. That will give a good understanding of how we go about our job on a day-to-day basis. So because we are a websites company, what we do is we actually log every activity that goes on our websites, whether it's a page view, click, or any user interaction that happens on the website. So you can imagine this would result in millions of records for each of these websites, in fact hundreds of millions of records per day. So all this information is captured and stored as a continuous stream of data that comes through. In addition to that, we also have information coming from our sources, which is our different search engines. So we have feeds coming in from Google, Yahoo, Gemini. So all this information is also parsed and loaded into the database. And finally, we also carefully track and monitor our ad monetization sources like Google AdSense. So what we have here in our team for this company is that we have plenty of, a wealth of information coming from many different sources, large volumes. So our job is to make sure that we structure it, parse it, and load it in the relational table so that it can be readily accessible for any kind of reporting or analytical needs. So again, this data is consumed by many different groups here at Ask.com. We have web analysts, product managers who actually keep making enhancements to the sites. And also we have data scientists who use this data to go up to refine and fine-tune our search results. So there are different, it's consumed by all groups, including revenue and also the marketing groups. So a day in a life, it would be anything from working on our ongoing projects to supporting the different data needs that might be about trying to troubleshoot issues that come about, or trying to open up new avenues where we can actually give more detailed analysis that the users would need.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, with all that data and all the different uses of it, tell me a little bit about how that data gets to those different users, like, what your overall data flow and data architecture look like.
Sure. So what you see here is on the slide is what our setup had been all the time. We have a traditional 3-tier architectural setup. At the lowest level, we have, like I said, all the informational sources coming from the websites and different search engines. So each of these is actually goes through our data pipeline where it is parsed and loaded into our database platform. In the past, we had multiple sources. As you can see, that's the middle layer in this slide. We had an MPP Actian database, which was called PADB, and we had several instances of Hadoop cluster implementations, and also we had many MySQL databases and InfiniDBs. Because each of these applications, each of the applications here have grown organically and kind of remained in their own silos, we had lots of databases that we had to consolidate and provide as a single medium for our eventual end user consumption. And on the consumption side, we had Tableau, that's our primary BI tool. In addition, there are users who actually run native SQL directly on these databases. So this has been the setup. As you can see, we have lots of data. We process at least 1.5 terabytes of data every day. And most of this information comes into our system in the form of JSON files. And in terms of, again, consumption-wise, Tableau, we use live connections. So most of the activity that goes on in Tableau will generate a live query that runs on each of these databases.
Okay, thank you for that overview. That helps a lot. So, when we first started talking with you, you mentioned that your previous environment, the one that you have here in this diagram, there were a number of things that weren't quite the way that you would want them. And so I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you were seeing in that environment.
Yes, in the prior setup, we had several issues, and some of the major ones that that come to my mind would be the frequent database outage. So even though our databases were supposed to handle any kinds of queries, especially at the time of peak usage when multiple users were trying to run large queries scanning these large tables, our database would crash several times. Especially during the week, during critical times, it used to go down. That was a big pain point. And not only that, even if the database did not go down, there were times when our database would just freeze because of the load that goes on the server, and our earlier MPP database wouldn't be able to support that. So we had a lot of issues with query performance altogether. And this led to a lot of delays in making the information provided to our users. So our SLAs were breached frequently, and overall the speed to decision making was affected because the analysts wouldn't be able to get the data on time. So overall it was in a big chaotic situation, and that's when we wanted to explore other options. Okay.
And so you mentioned, analysts not getting the data on time. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the impact of that? What were the things that analysts weren't able to do as a result of not getting access to data in the right time in the right way?
Absolutely. So on our marketing, I'll give you a use case, especially on our marketing side, because we are in the website business where things have to be analyzed on the fly and changes have to be applied very quickly. Because any changes in traffic or any effects to the overall traffic that comes to our site would result in direct loss, monetary loss. So we would expect our analysts to have all the data, everything available to them by 9 o'clock. So they would spend their first 1 hour in the morning running the different models and forecasting steps, and get to the right changes that they might have to put in their bidding algorithms with Google, or maybe tweaks to the website. So these were very critical for the functioning of the website. So anytime there was an outage or a delay, we would push that deadline by probably it would take till 11 o'clock or even sometimes noon. So it had a direct monetary impact. Anytime any kind of delays in the kind of analysis that we were supposed to do would have a very big impact on our downstream revenue.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, so that was when you started looking at Snowflake, and I thought it'd be interesting to just kind of give a little bit of background on Snowflake to kind of set the context, and then I'll come back and ask you a little bit more about how you deployed Snowflake and what you're seeing as a result. And the starting point for me is kind of coming back to what you talked about in your team needing support and what those analysts needed to do. I think all of us, who are in the data world, when we think about, well, what do you really want to be doing with data? If we wanted to think about it from, the outside point of view, what you really want to do is take on tough data problems, and you want to be able to figure out how to get new insights out of that data. I have a daughter that is in grade school, and I'm hoping that she'll want to be a data science superhero. I'm still working on convincing her of that. But ideally, that's what people really want to do, is fundamentally get interesting stuff from data and solve those hard problems. But when I think about what people really do, and I think some of what you said, Sanjay, really resonates with that. What they do on a day-to-day basis is often they deal with all these little kind of infrastructure type problems. They spend time waiting to get access to data. They spend time waiting to get access to infrastructure. And then they spend time competing with other groups for resources. One group has their queries that they want to run. Some other group wants to do a project really fast because they're on a tight deadline. And so they end up spending most of their time actually doing things that are not necessarily directly connected to getting information and insight from data. So if you simplified it down, what do you really want to get out of data analytics? Well, you want to get easy access to data. That was one thing that Sanjay, you already mentioned. You want to have more people have access to data. You mentioned that the IAC group has a bunch of different web properties, and there's a bunch of different analysts that want to get access to that data as a result. And of course, people would rather not deal with the cost and complexity that they've often faced in the past. But that's in pretty sharp contrast to what we actually see. We see people dealing with there's different silos of data. So the data from my website goes into one bucket. The data from my social presence goes into another bucket, and often those buckets mean even different systems. So that makes it a challenge certainly to get analysts access to that data in a timely fashion. Then when you come to the actual place where you store that data, it's pretty complex. You already mentioned, Sanjay, you had a couple different systems involved. You had that Hadoop cluster, you had that database. Often people have a bunch of different data marts that have different parts of their data. And what ends up happening, and I'm sure this is kind of something that you were seeing too, is you spend a lot of time just maintaining that system, making sure it's available, making sure the performance is great, making sure that you can get new data to people, all of those challenges. And at the end of the day, it comes down to frustrated analysts. What you mentioned about some of the impacts on analysts in your environment, Sanjay, I've definitely seen that a lot myself in kind of my past experience. People who don't have access to all the data that they could use, people who have delays in getting access, people who are struggling to get things done as fast as they would like to. All those are things that we hear all the time. And that's what really led us at Snowflake to step back and say, well, we really need to take a different approach. So we stepped back and we said, well, the problem actually is really significantly part of what you have as today's data infrastructure. And so to solve that problem, we really need to step back and rethink what data infrastructure people need. So one thing that we stepped back and said was, the data warehouse had a lot of value, but it wasn't delivering everything that was needed for today's type of data. You mentioned, Sanjay, you guys had started using Hadoop, and I'm sure partly it was because the databases you were familiar with didn't have support for some things you wanted to do with data, or didn't have that support at a cost that made sense to you. So we started and said, well, let's take the SQL data warehouse. So give people something that works with skills and tools they have, but let's take and redesign that for today's data and for the cloud, because we saw that so much of the data that people are processing doesn't come from just internal applications. It comes from external applications. It comes from web applications. It comes from third-party data. Like in your case, Sanjay, you have a bunch of data that's coming from your websites, and that's not necessarily a website probably sitting in a data center that you're sitting next to. It's probably somewhere out in some distributed environment. And so it just makes sense to start leveraging cloud for these things. And then the final thing that we really focused on was how do we make this basically kind of a self-service data warehouse for analysts? So how do we eliminate a lot of the care and feeding and tuning that went into traditional data warehousing? So when we started out, we said, well, okay, let's find a way to make it possible to get all the different data that people need in one place. That fragmentation and siloing of data was one of those key challenges that we saw analysts have. And so what we started out by saying was, well, by leveraging the cloud, we can make it possible for people to use any scale of data that they have without having to worry about capacity planning and scaling up and taking systems offline to scale. So that was one part of it. We're leveraging scalable cloud storage in a way that allows us to scale without the user ever having to think about it. It's kind of like your Google Mail. You don't worry about having to delete messages because you might run out of space. It's almost that same sort of concept. Whatever amount of data you want to use in the system, we transparently and automatically scale to handle that. At the same time, to make it easy to get all the data in one place, we need to make it inexpensive to do that. So when you think about one of the reasons that people have so much data that's not in the system for analysis, they might have massive spreadsheets on their desktop. There might be some file server out there that has some of that data. One of the reasons that a lot of that data doesn't get into a database is that it's often been so expensive to put it in one of those databases. It used to be that tens of thousands of dollars per terabyte was considered a pretty low price for storing data in a database. Well, we definitely saw that that was becoming a barrier, and so we actually made a point of leveraging the cloud economy of scale when it comes to storage. So we store data very efficiently. It's columnar, it's automatically compressed. You only pay for what you use, and we're doing that at cloud economies of scale. And then the last part that's actually pretty significant is the fact that some of these types of data that people deal with, you mentioned JSON in your example, Sanjay, these aren't really what traditional databases were built for. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was help people to avoid the need to do a lot of transformation work to get that data into a system where analysts can use it, and avoid having to have multiple systems. We have seen people who will have a Hadoop cluster set up solely because the data that they have can't be put directly into a relational database and needs to be transformed first. So one thing that we did with Snowflake is we built something that could natively load and process that semi-structured data as well as structured data. So this is things like that JSON data you have. Other people have Avro data. Some people have data like XML. Now the system can automatically load that as is without requiring transformation and make it immediately available to analysts. But at the same time, it's doing a lot of optimization under the covers. So now a Tableau analyst can still see great performance and still look directly into that JSON data without having to have an extra system in the process that is responsible for transforming that data. It really makes it possible to get that data faster. Then we also wanted to make it possible for analysts to get analytic results faster. Part of that was simplifying the data pipeline. So now instead of having multiple systems that are involved in transforming that data and getting it into a fast database, we can just load that directly into Snowflake. So it's already simplifying that pipeline. But going beyond that, we also wanted to make it trivially easy to scale up to support whatever scale workload you need. So if you need to run some monster query, and you're overloading the current processing resources, we actually in Snowflake have the ability to transparently scale that up on the fly. So if you have that monster query, rather than sitting and waiting because you don't have enough resources, scale it up, run that query, and you can always scale it back down when you're done with that. And that's one additional benefit you get from the approach that we took to the architecture. You don't have to worry about capacity planning. You don't have to go out and buy new hardware. It's in the cloud, and it can scale to minutes, and you don't have to take anything offline. And then one last part of getting performance is concurrency. So as you try to get more users, especially more BI users, accessing data, often a traditional system starts to bog down with concurrency challenges. And so you have to worry about, well, when can I do loading that won't impact my analytics? When can I have marketing do their analytics such that it won't impact finances, like end of quarter reports? In Snowflake, we allow each different group to have independent resources for processing their analytics. But we do all that with just one place where the data is stored. So in a very simple way now, we no longer have to worry about concurrency slowing everyone else down because there's no longer that competition for processing resources. And then just also critically important is the fact that we wanted to eliminate a lot of data warehouse management. When you talk to an analytics user, that's one of the big bottlenecks they often face is just the amount of time and effort it takes to manage that data warehouse. And so we focused on delivering a data warehouse as a service. And all of the different things that you would have to manage, even if it were a traditional data warehouse that's available in the cloud, are things that we take care of in software. So for an analyst, it's really more about self-service access without being bottlenecked, hoping to find extra IT resources to help out with that infrastructure. And because it's in the cloud, we take advantage of the fact that in the cloud, you can pay for only what you use. So we already get the economy of scale in that we run in Amazon. Amazon has massive economies of scale in terms of cost of storage and cost of compute. You only pay for what you use. If you need to run some massive job for 1 hour, you spin up the resources you need for 1 hour, and you spin them down after that hour, and you only pay for the time you use those. And then one other key thing is that we also find a lot of people who aren't processing all their data all the time, but they still want to have access to that. So they may have 100 terabytes of data, but on a typical day, maybe they're only processing a terabyte of that, but they occasionally do need to process that whole data set. We have a unique pricing model and architecture that allows people to pay independently for the processing horsepower they're using and for the actual amount of data they're storing. So there's a huge number of benefits there for the analytics people at a company that makes it much easier for them to get access to data and to process that. And with that background now, Sanjay, I wanted to turn back to you and hear a little bit about your experience rebuilding some of the aspects of your data infrastructure and how Snowflake fit into that.
Sure, absolutely. So as I was saying, we looked at various options, and of all the different vendors we have tried, Snowflake seemed to be a good fit in our environment, especially for our data needs. So we looked at various aspects like speed, fault tolerance, natively supported SQL functions, scalability, and also the support structure from the vendor. So in all regards, we felt Snowflake was way ahead of the other vendors, at least in our situation. So that's when we decided to go with Snowflake. In terms of how we went about the process, we started with an initial POC. I believe that was in the last quarter of last year. And for a month, we tried to replicate some of the most complex situations and scenarios that happened in our business. And Snowflake fared pretty well, and that's when we decided to go with the transition and migration towards Snowflake. As you can see in this new current architecture, we were able to not only replace our MPP database with Snowflake, we were also able to consolidate. I think going back to the scalability that you were talking about, we were able to retire some of the Hadoop clusters that we had, which had minimum usage. At the same time, we had to keep them up and running. So now with Snowflake's ability to add more and more data, we were able to migrate that as well. So everything is now in one consolidated place, which is the cloud platform that is Snowflake. And in terms of how we were able to launch this, we went in a staged manner, and it took us 4 months, but ultimately we were able to get this integrated into our architecture.
Okay. And tell me a little bit more about kind of how you did that migration. So what were kind of the key steps in making that transition from your previous environment to that Snowflake environment?
Sure. So like I said, it took us 4 months. We approached this in a staged manner. So we started with one business area at a time, so that anytime we had learnings, we were able to apply them in the subsequent business area that we were working in. So to begin with, we made sure that we were able to get the data structures, the tables and all the different, processes that were associated with loading them into Snowflake. And we were still having the old system in place. So while we had Snowflake up and running with all the new data that was coming in from our websites, we also had the old system. So for a while, we had both the systems running in parallel. So that gave us, that was of great help to us, especially in our data validation and QA efforts. We were able to check, the numbers, and everything was tying up accurately as to how it was before. And also we did a lot of load and stress tests to make sure that Snowflake was fault tolerant and it was not crashing. So those were the other things. And when we were totally convinced that everything fell in place and the data was to the standard that we wanted, we started training some of our users as a pilot group. We call them our pilot users. So they were selected from all the different groups as a representative group. And they helped us in our QA efforts. And once the data passed the UAT, we had a company-wide launch where we trained the rest of the users. So very recently, we have actually retired our old systems. So now we are completely moving on Snowflake.
Okay, great. So tell me a little bit more about some of the benefits that you saw in Snowflake and how that impacted your users and their analytics.
Absolutely. So one thing what we found very helpful and has been a big success for us is the load partitioning. It's that ability within Snowflake where we can separate ETL processing jobs from the user queries. So we wouldn't be able to run into issues where users are impacted by background jobs that are going on. Especially in our environment, like I said, we had continuous stream of data, so our backend jobs pretty much run all the time. So by separating that out, we were able to have similar performance or consistent performance throughout the day. And the second thing is with regard to the native functions that Snowflake supports for JSON parsing. They are relatively fast and very optimized compared to how it was done in the prior database where we had to write our UDFs, user-defined functions. Snowflake's JSON parsing functions are much faster. That way we were able to cut short some of our processing times. For example, one of our jobs which was time-consuming, which was taking 4 hours in the past, now gets completed under 2 hours. So that was a big leg up compared to how it was done before. And the third thing for us is the query visibility. Unlike most of the databases I've come across, Snowflake provides visibility into an ongoing query as to how much it has progressed. Snowflake gives us, the data space that we have scanned so far and how much more it will, how much more time it would take to complete, finally complete. So that visibility has also really made us more aware of how things are progressing on the database, rather than just waiting for something to go on forever and finally crash. So that has also been very helpful. And regarding the stability, like I was saying, that was a major problem. And ever since we started on Snowflake, there has never been a single outage. So our users are extremely happy, and we never ran into any issues. Even in times of peak usage, Snowflake's load management worked really well, where some of the queries might go on queue, and eventually will be placed on the processing mode. So that kind of alleviated all these SLA-related issues, and the productivity has increased, not only within our team, but for the rest of the organization also, because now we're able to focus on the work that we are supposed to do rather than trying to figure out and troubleshoot and administer the nodes and the problems that happen on the servers. So that way it has really helped. And finally, the integration piece, like I said, now as we retired some of those other redundant data sources that we had, now with Snowflake scalability features, we were able to just add them as an extra schema into our database. So now we are truly having everything in one place, and it makes it so much easier for us to integrate and build a comprehensive reporting system.
Thanks for that overview. That really helps to give a picture of what you're seeing from Snowflake. And then you started talking a little bit about this, but I was wondering if you could provide kind of the perspective. If we went and talked to your Tableau users, what are some of the things that they would say really has made life easier for them now that you've made this change in your infrastructure?
Sure. One thing I keep repeatedly hearing is that in the past, in Tableau, I guess Tableau supports, getting data from different sources and blending them. But users always preferred using data sources. But the thing with data sources is that it is configured for a specific data platform. With the consolidation efforts that went on in the company with the introduction of Snowflake, now getting tables from different databases or different sources is so much easier because it's pretty much a different schema in the Snowflake overall database. That way it became much more seamless to get information coming from different tables and different applications because everything is ultimately housed in Snowflake. And again, the same thing for query visibility. Like I was saying, just as how we admins are able to view the queries, users can also monitor their individual queries. That way, users can troubleshoot some of the issues before even coming to us. As you might know, Tableau doesn't have an inherent feature to see the queries that are generated by Tableau. And in most databases, it's a little challenging to see what the query is because one has to scan through the logs or some other way. But Snowflake's portal allows us to literally go and see what queries are currently running and are issued by a particular user and just look at the query. And also monitor how far along it has progressed or whether it's scanning the right amount of data volume. So the query visibility has definitely helped us, even for the Tableau users. And like I said, again, the usage logs, because Snowflake keeps it so much easier to understand what the usage patterns have been for each of our Tableau users as a group or as an individual. It made it so much easier for us to get a handle on how our data needs have evolved or are changing with period of time. Finally, all these advantages have definitely helped us better manage our user expectations because we are more aware of how the demand is for data and what kind of tables they are kind of querying at any time. So overall, it has been a win-win for all of us here.
Okay, thank you for that information also. So, I'd just be kind of curious, overall, are there some things that now your analysts are able to do that they weren't able to do before? What are some of the things that are some of the downstream impacts of, the changes that you've made in your overall data environment for those analytics users?
Absolutely. So earlier, we were on a, even though we get continuous streams of data, we were on a lag of at least 4 hours because that's how much time it took for us to process and make the data available. With Snowflake, we were able to optimize, use maybe better SQL functions. Altogether, we are able to bring it to almost like 15-minute delay. So our data is as old as what has happened 15 minutes ago. So this has been a tremendous boost to our analysts because the insights are much more fresh and users are being more proactive in their day-to-day jobs. And we are actually trying to figure, in future we have even plans to make it almost real time as we further trying to streamline, and we believe Snowflake will even support that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for providing that overview of your experience and some of the things that you've been working on there. Ross, I wanted to turn it over to you to fill in some of the picture here, and I believe you're also going to give people a little bit of a demo of how Tableau and Snowflake work together.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, John, and thanks, Sanjay. It's wonderful to get a good insight into how people are using Tableau and Snowflake in the real world. So I'd actually like to show, in that same spirit, I'd like to show a real-world example of Tableau and Snowflake together. Sanjay already did a really good job of talking about why you might use Tableau and Snowflake together, but what I'm going to show you today is the integration of the two tools together and how quickly you can connect to data in Snowflake with Tableau, create the visualizations that you want to, and then create a dashboard that you might want to share with the rest of your team. I'll also show you joining structured and semi-structured data together, which is obviously a capability within Snowflake that we like to leverage with Tableau, and again, sharing with the larger organization. So let's talk a little bit about how it works. So Tableau and Snowflake work just like Tableau would work with any other database. You can connect directly to Snowflake, which I'll be showing you in just a moment. You can also extract, if you have a subset of data that you'd like to work with, you can easily extract it into Tableau's own in-memory data engine, which can allow you to bring it into your local machine and then use the data there. Once you have created a visualization that you want to share, you can publish it to Tableau's server or Tableau Online, which is a hosted SaaS version of Tableau's server. And that direct connection to Snowflake will remain, or you can, again, use the use the extract that you created in Tableau from the data in Snowflake to publish. So what this means is that you can be direct or in-memory, whether you're working on your local machine or whether you're publishing the view for others to see. And you can have the flexibility of the speed of Snowflake and the scalability regardless of where you're showing this visualization or how you're sharing it. The other thing that's really powerful with Tableau is being able to blend in other data sources, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. But let's go to the data. Excuse me. Let's go to the demo, and actually we are going to go to the data. Now, typically in a Tableau demo, you're not going to see us talk about the database very much. In fact, you're definitely not going to see us log in or try to demo the database itself. But as a marketer, I think I'm very qualified to say that I'm not a database administrator, but the experience with Snowflake is exceptionally user-friendly. And that benefits everybody, regardless of whether you're extremely technical or not, because you're able to do the things that you need to do with Snowflake really quickly. A great example is here's the warehouse that we're actually using today to demo. And you can see if I have a need to increase the size of my warehouse, I can do it on the fly. I can set my suspension settings, so if I want this warehouse to auto-suspend after an hour or after a day so I can make sure to keep my costs low, that's really easy to do. And of course I can look into the SQL itself. Now, I just wanted to kind of briefly go over that before we connected, because, again, for me, being able to come in here, create a warehouse on my own, if I have a need, like for instance, if I want to create a warehouse for a specific workbook that I know is going to the executive committee that I want to make sure has enough support behind it, I can easily do that and spin it up on my own, which is a fantastic capability. Now today we're going to be connecting to, this is Tableau Desktop, and what we're going to be doing today is connecting to a tweets database and recreating the dashboard that you see in front of you. Now we're going to be doing this in about 10 minutes, and then afterwards we can cover questions as we go along. But let's start just by connecting to Snowflake. Now, Snowflake is just one of dozens of data sources that you can connect to with Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server. And if you have a need to combine those data sources together, you can do so within Tableau. We're not going to be doing that today, but if it's a need that you have, you're able to do it within Tableau. Now, if you're familiar with connecting to a database in Tableau, it's relatively straightforward. You'll notice that this experience is very similar. We're just selecting the warehouse in Snowflake and the database, and then the schema that we want to use. And then once we do, we have access to all of the tables that are sitting in Snowflake right now. Again, we're looking at a database of tweets, so from Twitter, and all I have to do to start using that is to go to a sheet. I noticed that many of you are already familiar with Tableau, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically Tableau splits up categorical and numerical data into two separate components, and it automatically categorizes data that may have special information about it. A good example would be country code, right? There's geographical data behind that, but Tableau already knows where to place all of those individual countries. I didn't have to go in and edit this in any way in order to do that. Okay, so let's take a look now. We have a good idea of where tweets are happening, but let's also look at where all of the listed users are within this data source. Now you can see Tableau has already called out within our data set there's a couple of unknowns. Well, we can filter that data out automatically. So some tools are going to just hide the data automatically, or they're going to not tell you when there's null data, but Tableau calls that out for you and makes it easy to edit out. You can also edit how the data is displayed and change the ramp endpoints on this particular color legend so that we can see a little bit better where people are tweeting. You can see the US, Brazil, UK, Spain, India, Indonesia, Australia. So this gives us a good idea of where people are tweeting. Let's take a look at this data over time. This particular data source is 1 day, and it's split. It's basically a subset of this data source. And the created at field is actually the detailed time information that we want to use to create a view showing us how people were tweeting over time. The problem is, you'll notice it didn't come in and it wasn't automatically formatted as a date. With Tableau, we can go in, change it to date and time, and then it just automatically works for us. Let's take a look at these tweets by hour. You can see there's a peak here around 12 p.m. And we can even drill into the minute if we want to. Now, every single thing that I've been doing here in Tableau is a live query back to Snowflake. And you're noticing that there's no pop-up box telling me that there's a query going back to the database and asking me to wait, and no running timer or spinning wheel. This happens almost in real time. That's really one of the biggest benefits of using Tableau with Snowflake, is that you're getting the benefit of a live query back to the data source, but you're also getting the speed that you might expect if you had extracted or if you're working with a smaller subset. Let's take a look and see which languages are the most common. Now you can see that there's a spike here in English, but also in Japanese around 12 p.m. And let's change this, the way that this is displayed as well, so we have a slightly more aligned color palette. And this gives us a good idea of what time people are tweeting. With Tableau, one other benefit that you're going to get over other tools is the ability to take a visualization and then create a different riff off of it. First, I'm going to duplicate this sheet and use Show Me, which is a tool that's automatically configured in Tableau to read the data that you have in the view and suggest alternative ways of viewing that information. So you can click between the different visualization types without necessarily knowing how to create them or understanding what's inside of the data. And this gives you a lot of flexibility. with how you can see, interact with, and understand the data that you have within Snowflake. And here we get a summarized view showing us the aggregate number of tweets. And you can see that English is by far the largest language, followed by Japanese, Spanish, Portuguese are also very popular. Now, when you have a finished view in Tableau or a couple of finished views, you can combine them on a dashboard. And that is just as simple as dragging and dropping. But just enabling people to see multiple views on one dashboard isn't really going to empower them in any meaningful way, which is why in Tableau we enable you to allow interactivity. So if I'm somebody who's coming from Brazil as an example, I can click and then it automatically filters for me, showing the data for just Brazil. You'll notice even with that relatively difficult query where we're taking a subset of the data, it returns in just a couple of seconds. The other type of interactivity that you can easily enable with Tableau is what we call quick filters. So with this, I can filter to, say, any tweets after 11 a.m., and I can even apply this across the entire data source. So it'll filter all of the views, not just the view over time. Tableau also enables a large amount of choice with how you display the data that's in your final dashboard. So if I want to have the filter be floating over the rest of my dashboard, it's a little bit more fluid of an experience. I can easily do that. Now the last thing that I wanted to show you today is that we've got kind of a final dashboard that we might want to share with other people, is the ability to combine multiple tables within Tableau, whether they be structured or unstructured data. So let's go back to our data source. And you can see within this warehouse I have access to multiple different tables. And in addition to this tweets view, I also have a view that shows me customers within different countries. So let's go ahead and drag out those two. You can see Tableau's visual join window makes it relatively easy, in fact automatically recognizes when there's like fields within any of the tables that you're bringing up. And when it's not automatically recognized, I can go in and create the join myself. And then of course when we go back, you can see that additional tables have been added, and I have the flexibility of being able to continue analyzing this data as I go along, even though what I've done is combined a structured and semi-structured data source together in one view. Of course, the final component, once you've created a visualization in Tableau, is to publish it to share with other people. Now, I know that we're a little bit short on time and we have a lot of questions, so what I'm going to do is just kind of show you the experience that you would see. So once you have the data source that you want to publish, you can then publish it up to either Tableau Server or Tableau Online. And this is similar to other business intelligence products, of course the difference being with Tableau, you have a lot of flexibility and ease of use that you wouldn't see otherwise. And you can enable, of course, Active Directory, Kerberos, other enterprise level tools that you might expect to be able to use to enable access to the people within your organization the way that you want to enable it. All right, so with that, I think we should definitely get to Q&A. I skipped a couple of pieces there because I know that I saw the volume of questions coming in. And so with that, I'll hand it back over.
Great. Thank you, Ross. Thank you to all of our presenters today. This leads us now to our Q&A portion of the presentation, at which time I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions in the chat window of your lower left-hand corner of the screen. In the meantime, while our speakers are going through the questions that have been submitted, please answer our quick poll question here. And we'll leave this open for just a couple of minutes, so please be sure to click directly on your screen to answer if you wouldn't mind reading through. Read through each of the answers and select your decision. I'll leave that open for a minute or so while our presenters are reviewing the questions that have come in. Okay, and those questions are still rolling in. Thank you for that. Please remember to submit your answer on the survey on your screen. Just another moment. Thank you, everyone. All right. And John, if you wouldn't mind taking a look and see if you have any comments on what the poll is indicating here.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that there isn't necessarily like one overwhelming thing that everyone says is the only problem that they're facing, which is pretty consistent with what we hear from people too. The fact that people are just trying to figure out like how do I analyze the data, and that can in my experience that can be a lot of different things. It can be having people who know how to look at data. There's data artisans, or there's data scientists, or there's data users. Concurrency is one we talked about that we see a lot of people talking about, and also just new types of data. I mean, Ross, I'm sure you probably see some of the same challenges as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tableau users are always talking about analyzing data, of course, but one of the common things that people come to us with are data problems. Problems that Tableau doesn't necessarily solve. We're not a database, but we allow people to see and analyze that data. And so solving those data problems with our customers is a huge part of what we do. And it's interesting that the poll is almost evenly split between those top three. So not too surprising though. So John, I was thinking we have, I saw a lot of questions about ingesting data into Snowflake. I think it might be good to talk about that. There's a couple of Tableau questions I saw that I was thinking about answering. So I'm not sure if you want to start with ingesting data into Snowflake or what, but happy to go either way.
Okay, yeah. So there were a bunch of different questions there, a handful of different aspects to those. And one of them that I saw asked by several people was for a little bit about Sanjay's kind of approach to getting data in. And the one common question that I saw most often was people were asking, Sanjay, were you using ETL tools, or were you doing transformation of the data before you loaded it into Snowflake? And so I'm interested in hearing a little bit more detail about kind of how you approach ETL and transformation as you're using Snowflake.
So over here, the way we handle the ETL side of things is mostly through SQLs. Again, these SQLs are run on Snowflake again. So I think we don't have any specialized tools like Informatica or something. We use SQL to kind of do all the transformation or any kind of parsing that we need to do. At the same time, to have it run as an ETL process, we use Python. Python is a framework where we actually embed our different queries that are used to clean up the data or do any kind of transformation. And we use Jenkins to schedule these different processes that need to be kicked off periodically, and that's how we manage it.
Yeah, and kind of related to that is something more on the Snowflake side was just kind of some questions around, well, what tools could I use for that with Snowflake? And the simple answer is, Snowflake does have ODBC and JDBC connectors. So any ETL type tool that you may have that works with a database and can speak to a database through ODBC and JDBC can connect to Snowflake. We also do have optimized connectors for some of the most common tools out there that even more understand how to work with the ways that are best for transforming data, including transforming data inside Snowflake. So those are all options that people have. And we also have interfaces for things like Python. So there is a native Python interface if you want to be able to work with data in Snowflake using the Python database connection bindings as well. So there's a lot of different options. But at the same time, some of the transformation that you might have had to do outside the database before may not be necessary to do before you get data into Snowflake. We do support JSON natively without having to transform it, and so that gives you an option that can avoid a lot of steps around processing via flattening or extracting certain data fields. So all different options that you have. So Ross, another area of questions that I saw come up a lot has to really do with kind of like, the connectivity between Tableau and Snowflake. Some of them related to like, what does Tableau do with the connector that's optimized for Snowflake? And some of them even related to the question around, extracts versus native in-database processing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those areas.
Yeah, you bet. It's fantastic to be on a webinar where there's 60 questions. It's also scary because I don't know where we should answer first. But yeah, so I think with Tableau and Snowflake together, and Sanjay talked a little bit about this as he was talking about how they're using the tools together. But the way I would suggest it is first starting off with a live connection, of course, and trying to basically build the connection in a way that it makes it relatively easy to analyze it with a direct connection. And so, of course, depending on the size of your database, you may want to limit the queries that you're working with to a subset. But generally, you're going to get an extremely good experience in comparison with other data warehousing tools when you're using Tableau as a direct connection to Snowflake. And so there were questions about whether or not this is extracted data. Everything you saw today was a live connection. Now, the second piece that I think is important to talk about is just being able to perform the types of analytics that you need to. And there was the questions about, is Snowflake geospatially aware? Well, you saw with Tableau that Tableau is geospatially aware. So regardless of how your data sits in Snowflake, Tableau is smart enough to recognize the formatting of your data and automatically create the visualization that makes the most sense for that type of data. So in some ways, leveraging Tableau on top of Snowflake solves a lot of problems that you'd have to solve in the database with other tools, but it makes it easy to do within Tableau instead, and that saves you a lot of time. Now, let's see here. There's some other ones in here that I thought were relatively interesting. And now this doesn't particularly relate to the live or in-memory question, but I saw some people asking about where Tableau is running. And the answer is that Tableau Desktop, which is the analysis tool that you saw me using and dragging and dropping with, is a desktop tool. But with Tableau Server, you can, which is the tool that you would use to share a visualization, you can host that in AWS or on Azure or GCP, or you can rely on Tableau Online, which is our own hosted SaaS product, which is exactly like Tableau Server. So the hosting question is really up to you. So however you want to host your sharing platform, you can do that with Tableau. And one more thing that I want to talk about too is that Tableau gives you the ability to edit your metadata and then share a connection with people. So if you have a direct connection with Snowflake that you want to share with your organization, you've already massaged the data and made groups and calculations and single version of the truth, you can use Tableau Server to share that with your organization in a way that is really easy and also continues to leverage the direct connection to Snowflake, which you already saw was very powerful.
Okay, great. Yeah, so another set of questions I saw for Sanjay had to do with just how you're managing data volume. And there are a couple of different aspects. One was basically people were asking, how much data are the analysts using Tableau looking at a given time? And then the other question was, how do you manage the volume of data that you have? Because certainly at 1.5 terabytes a day, that adds up very quickly. So I was curious if you can shed some light on that, Sanjay.
Sure. We have different levels of summary tables. And the way what we've observed on Snowflake is that as long as people are querying within last week, live connections work really well. If somebody wants to do a month's worth of analysis or even more, that's when we actually direct them towards the summary tables. And the way we handle that through Tableau is that we have pre-built data sources that are published on the server. So whenever our users want a particular type of analysis, we have trained them to go to the right data source. That way they will be directed to the appropriate tables and the queries would work. So even though we are getting 1.5 terabytes of data, so these summary tables have much smaller volumes, and they give a really good performance when queried from Tableau.
Okay, great. Yeah. Then there were another area of questions which had to do with just a little bit more about Snowflake and how it works. And one of the questions that I saw come up was basically what technology is Snowflake built on? And it's actually a very important question in that it's a very unique architecture in that Snowflake actually is not built on some existing open source database. It's not built on top of Hadoop or Spark or Cassandra or any of those. It actually is a database that we custom built for the cloud. We have some architects who spent 15 to 20 years each on building databases. One of our founders actually, I think he said that Snowflake is, the 7th database that he's worked on and built that was a new database. And so, we really wanted to make sure we could take advantage of the cloud, and that's why we built a custom engine for Snowflake. Another question I saw was just related to, Amazon Web Services and how we fit in there. And so, so Snowflake is a data warehouse offered as SaaS, software as a service, that does happen to run inside of Amazon Web Services. We do provide tools that, even if you're not an Amazon Web Services user, it's actually still very easy to use Snowflake. We provide tools that help move data from on-premise into the cloud, into, in this case, Amazon's S3, from which we can load it in Snowflake. But if you already have data that resides in Amazon's S3, then we can just directly load that from Amazon's S3, and we have tools to help with that. I see a few more questions also about, basically, how does Snowflake price? So there's really kind of two variables that go into the pricing of Snowflake. So one of them is the volume of data stored. So basically, very similar to how Amazon charges for cloud storage. We look at the volume of data being used, and the charge is based on that on the one hand. And then the second variable is how much processing resources you consume. And so certainly, if you're using a small amount of processing resources for a small amount of time, you pay one charge. But if you use those for a longer period of time, it's multiplied by the time you use it. And the great thing about this is that in Snowflake you actually have the ability to run it in a way that if you're not actually doing any processing of data, you are only paying for the storage of data. And then only when you actually spin up the processing do you need to pay for processing. But you don't have to load data into the processing layer. That's all transparently handled and cached automatically by Snowflake. So that also is a key part of all of that. Now, I also see some questions that are really focused around the different aspects of the different types of tools you can use. And so I see people asking about predictive analytics tools. And again, because we do have ODBC and JDBC connectivity, certainly tools that can work with standard databases can leverage data that's in Snowflake. But also we do have native connectors for things like R. So if you have an R environment, we have a package that allows you to work directly with data in Snowflake as well. So those are some different aspects.
Which you can also do with Tableau as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or specifically.
So definitely, there's lots of different options you have. Lots of things you can do in Tableau. And actually, most of the customers we talk to who use Tableau love the fact that they can do the vast majority of their analysis in Tableau against Snowflake. But also, they may have analysts who want to go in and write specific SQL queries, and they can do that and embed that into Tableau in the way that Tableau pulls data. And so, there are different ways to leverage that capability in Tableau as well. So we're just about out of time. Let me just take a quick check and see any other questions that we can answer. And I know we are not going to be able to get to all the questions because I see a lot of those. But I guess the final question that I thought would be interesting to answer is basically how do you, Sanjay, at Ask.com, help people who are using Tableau to understand how to work with Snowflake? So did it require changes on their part? Did you need to have the analysts who are using Tableau do anything differently, or how do you approach that?
I mean, honestly, from a Tableau perspective, if people were using Tableau before, there was very little change management that we had to do. Only for people using queries directly, we had to help them configure their earlier query interfaces, whichever they were using. So otherwise, from a Tableau perspective, it was straightforward, especially in the new version of Tableau. Snowflake is available as in one of the providers or the connectors. As it's natively supported by Tableau, it was very straightforward. So it was not much of learning that we had to undergo when we were trying to do this.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just to wrap up, definitely there were a lot of questions we weren't able to get to. We will follow up with you on those and try to make sure we get all those questions answered offline. But thank you again for sending those questions in. Also, just wanted to leave you with a couple of next steps. Ross, if people want to, get a hands-on experience with Tableau, what's the next steps that they can take?
Well, the best step is to go to our website, and if you're not already using Tableau, tableau.com, and once you get there, the top right-hand corner, you'll see a free trial button, so you can access a 14-day free trial of Tableau Desktop, which you can use directly with Snowflake right away. You saw the connection experience. All you have to know is your Snowflake site and your username and password. And then you can also get a free 14-day trial of Tableau Server or Tableau Online to demo the sharing experience once you're finished creating your visualizations.
Okay. Yeah, and on the Snowflake side, there's a number of different places you can go. If you go to the Snowflake website, which is snowflake.net, it's actually not snowflake.com, it's snowflake.net. You can go there, and under our resources page, there's a number of different white papers and such about Snowflake. We do have some demos, including a Tableau with Snowflake demo that are on our YouTube channel, so by all means take a look at those. And if you're interested in talking with someone about how you can try out Snowflake on your own, we do have a Try It Now button on our website, which will send your information over to our team, and they'll reach out to you to help you get set up and get a chance to try out Snowflake in your own environment. So with that, I wanted to thank our speakers. Thank you very much, Sanjay. Really appreciate your insight and the insights you provided about how you approached your data analytics challenges at Ask.com. Ross, really appreciate you showing us that demo and showing us a little bit more about how Tableau works with Snowflake. And also appreciate all of the people who joined and asked some great questions, and we'll definitely make sure we get back to you on that. This webinar was recorded. We will send everyone a link so that they can view it anytime they want or share it with colleagues. And certainly look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
All right, thank you everyone. That is all the time that we have left for today. As mentioned, if we haven't addressed your question directly, we'll be following up with you individually. Again, each presenter's contact details are available on your screen right now. And Snowflake will be following up with you with a link to today's recording. You can find additional resources, as we mentioned, on the left side of your screen in the chat box. Thank you again to our presenters from Tableau, Snowflake Computing, and Ask.com. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.